is at its best when it hits that perfect balance between heart-wrenching, melancholic character study, disturbing horror, exciting action, with a surprise or two thrown into the mix. And that is very much exemplified in these chapters when Rukia comes face to face with one of the Espada. Aranyero. It's a hard name to say, so if I'm butchering it, I'm sorry, but he's the Espada with the tall mask, and as it turns out, he's ranked number 9. So I wasn't all that far off when I guessed his number. I thought he'd be number 8, so I'm pretty satisfied that I almost got that right. Very close. But I shouldn't be surprised, because Aranyero has a way of fooling people. Kubo sets the stage for these chapters beautifully by kind of subtly disorienting the reader's perception of what's real and what's hidden in darkness. The weird sky inside of Las Noches immediately challenges our preconceived notions of this setting, making it feel like we're outside when, as far as we know, we're still inside of the palace. It messes with our sense of scale and our sense of where we are. And then Aranyero brings Rukia into a place without light, where things are naturally difficult to see. It's a really smart move by Kubo to put Rukia in this kind of environment, not only isolated but also confused and not able to perceive things exactly as they are at first. And things only get more uncertain for her from there. It's when Aranyero removes his mask that this confrontation takes a truly chilling and absolutely shocking turn. Like, I might have been freaking out to the point that I had to immediately react here on YouTube in a post. Like, I was freaking out when I was reading this in bed. I couldn't believe it. Because when the mask comes off, it's Rukia's old lieutenant, Kaien Shiba, underneath. Guys, when I say that I was stunned to see him, that's putting it lightly. You could have told me that the person underneath that mask is a character we've already met, and I don't think Kaien would have been any of the first 100 characters that I would have guessed. Like, I would have guessed, like, literally most other people that were shown to be alive before I chose a dead guy. And I know that this series, deals with ghosts and reapers and spirits in the afterlife, but I never would have guessed this. Like, this is the man that Rukia was forced to kill after he had become merged with a hollow, and he's been dead throughout the whole span of the Bleach story. I talked a lot about those events in a previous video because it was such a monumental moment in Rukia's life that influenced a lot of her current thoughts and action. We talked about Rukia's bond with Kaien back then, and how killing him might have been Rukia's defining decision as a person. It was tragic, it was devastating, it seemed like the only way. A necessary kill to save him and to save others. Yet here he is, dwelling in the land of the Hollows, apparently alive and well in a sense. From the moment I first saw this particular Espada, I wondered why Narankar was wearing a mask. It wasn't shattered like the others, which made it clear to me that this is not his hollow mask. This was a mask meant to hide something, so the idea that it could be shrouding the face of a known character seems fitting enough, honestly. And from the moment he reveals himself, quote-unquote Kaien is the same supportive, funny, kind man that Rukia remembers. But Rukia and us as readers can't help but question it at least a little bit, because we saw him die. But Kubo clearly wanted to remind me that I'm a little gullible, because as much as I hate to admit this, I actually almost fell for this. Almost. It took me until pretty much it started to really be confirmed for Rukia. Like, I was in this state of confusion with her, trying to figure this all out. Whether it was real, whether it was not, whether this was actually him, I was right there with Rukia. I was locked in, and that meant that her and I were confused together, because initially I was very shook, and I believed Kaien was back for more than a few pages, but then there's just that bad feeling in my gut and my brain, reminding me that I watched him get killed, and as a fellow writer, I had to ask myself, would Kubo really bring Kaien back and kind of nullify the impact of that moment for Rukia? So as much as a part of me was excited to see Kaien, a more sensible part of me wasn't entirely convinced. Like, I wasn't fully fooled, but I was very much on the fence. It wasn't easy for me to pick a side at first because the story of how Kaien could be back seemed somewhat plausible. What helped to sell this charade for me was that it wasn't like the story was trying to convince me that Rukia didn't actually kill Kaien, or that he somehow survived what happened. It wasn't like they were trying to say that at the last second a car drove by and pulled Kaien out of the way of Rukia's sword, you know? Or Rukia only thought he died. Or that Kaien faked his own death by slowing down his heartbeat. And Kubo made it so that the only reason that Kaien could even be here is because Rukia did actually kill him. His body was merged with the hollows when he died, so it was sent to Hueco Mundo. It all kind of checked out to me, at least for a little bit. Kubo expertly left me on the border of confusion until the moment when Rukia finally accepted that it was a trick. Because one of the saddest things about this is that there was a part of Rukia that wanted this to be true, that was almost willing to believe it, and I wanted to believe it too. Because despite his limited appearances, Kaien left an impression. I ranked him pretty high on my lieutenant ranking despite only being in a flashback, because he was just that good of a character, he was that likable. So it could be interesting to bring him back in this way, and to have an ally behind enemy lines. Like, I could see it, that could be an interesting story in its own right. But in the long run, I'm glad that Kaien Shiba isn't actually back. With characters whose death serves such an important purpose, reviving them takes something away. But man, I was really rattled for a bit. Like, for the most part, he acted just like Kaien. He knew things that only Kaien would know, and he even had Kaien's Bankai, which, contrary to what Diamond Dust Rebellion tried to tell me, is something that's usually very individualized and personal. So it's almost cruel to us as the readers that the first time we get to see Kaien's Bankai is when it's being misused in someone else's hands, wielded against someone that Kaien never would have attacked with it. And even the moments of doubt that keep happening throughout the scene get an explanation moments later to keep us, on edge. Like when he literally attacks Rukia and draws blood, he makes it seem like he was just training her like he used to, or seeing her progress. When he says he wants to kill her because she killed him, he walks it back moments later to say he's joking. And it's tough because the creature that's wearing Kaien's face has all of his memories too. He knows about his relationships, his feelings, his innermost thoughts, and how he behaves. He remembers every experience that Kaien has ever had. So in some ways, he almost is Kaien Shiba. But there was just those little moments, those little acts of cruelty or sadism that gave him away. It was like Eren Yarrow just couldn't help himself. The Hollow's true nature was bleeding through despite having literally absorbed Kaien into his being. Like this Hollow, who interestingly enough is apparently the only Espada that was a Gillian before becoming an Espada. This Hollow found the merged Kaien and Metastasia and ate them, absorbing them into his being. So Kaien is actually there in a way. It's not just taking his shape, it's not just an illusion or only an insult to his memory by imitating him. It goes beyond that. It's a desecration of his body or soul, or however a Soul Reaper's biology works. In a way, Eren Yarrow is puppeteering Kaien's corpse. The Kaien that Rukia is up against is the same physical being that she stabbed through the chest and that died in her arms. And that makes it so much worse to me. I almost wish, for Rukia's sake, that it was just an illusion, or someone that can mimic the appearance alone, but this Kaien in front of her carries the real thing's presence, and probably even things like his smell. It's all just very disturbing and not okay, but narratively this is the perfect enemy for Rukia to have to face. And side note, but a nice touch is that if this all seemed too coincidental or too convenient that Eren Yarrow is up against the one Soul Reaper he could mess with the most, Kubo made sure to give a good reason for this. Gin, who obviously liked to taunt people and play head games, is the one that led Rukia to Eren Yarrow. I love that. It reminds us of Gein's little smirking sadism and gives a good explanation to help support that this encounter even happens. Because so much of Eren Yearo's strength in this fight and the advantage he has is the mental battle he's waging on Rukia, where that wouldn't be as effective with any of the others. Showing up as Kaien I don't think would be a big deal, even to like Renji. As far as we know, Renji wasn't that close with Kaien or anything. But for Rukia, this is a very painful experience, and that's not including getting impaled by a trident. The emotional journey she's forced to go on during this encounter is probably enough to cripple most people, to push someone into hysterics or shatter their sense of sanity. After all, she's been wrestling with her guilt about Kaien since the moment she had to kill him, and it's something we've seen her deal with throughout this whole series. Guilt can be one of the more powerful motivators for a person and for a character, something that drives your decisions and changes your perceptions of the world around you and, most importantly, of yourself. Her guilt over Kaien was enough to convince her that she deserved punishment and death in the Soul Society arc. And she did get some closure with his family, yes, but now the scar has been torn back open. When she believes this is Kaien at first, and he asks her to die for him like he died for her, she's actually willing to let him take his vengeance. But the beautiful thing is she wants him to wait for Orihime to be saved to do it. She's willing to die for what she did to Kaien, but she's not willing to abandon the friend she's trying so hard to save. This shows such a level of loyalty to Orihime, but also a weird morbid respect toward her old lieutenant. But most of all, it's a sad look at how Rukia still views her role in Kaien's death. It's tough to see the early parts of this when Rukia really does believe it, and it helps sell her anger when she realizes not only is she being played, but Kai and Shiba's memory is being spit on. Because Eren Yearo overplays his hand. Like I was saying earlier, he can't help himself, it seems like, from being cruel and from trying to do something disturbing. Like, he, as Kaien, asks her to kill her friends for him, to repay her debt to him by murdering her friends. And this is what tips her off. This is the tipping point where she goes, no, this absolutely isn't Kaien. And that's the moment when I'm like, yeah, this definitely isn't Kaien, because it was just extremely dark to have her dead mentor tell her to kill her current friends. It was just messed up. And still, even when she has 99% confirmation after that, she needs to know for sure in order to fight at her best. She needs to see with her own eyes that this really isn't Kaien. The whole sequence when Rukia lets the sunlight in was brilliant on a number of levels. There's the symbolism of the truth piercing through all of the lies and uncertainty and doubts, illuminating what's actually going on. But I also really enjoyed the more vampiric nature of this too. Eren Yearo's strength comes from the darkness, and he's been doing nothing but feeding off of Rukia's regrets, only to be hit by a beam of sunlight, to have his true monstrous nature finally out in the open. I loved it. It gives Rukia the clarity she needs to stop holding back when Kaien's face melts away and we see the real Eren Yearo for the first time. Guys, I thought he had an interesting design when he was first introduced with the mask on, but I never could have guessed what was actually beneath that. Not ever. 2 little talking skulls inside of a vat where his head should be. It's wild. One of the most unique and unsettling characters Kubo has drawn so far. Absolutely, just extremely gross. I particularly love how the skulls have 2 very different voices in the anime, and this all just makes me have to wonder about the nature of this hollow. Is him apparently being made up of 2 identities the result of his habit of absorbing other hollows? It's just a really unsettling visual to see and absolutely unlike anything we've seen in the series at this point. He doesn't look like the big, hungry, hulking hollows, and he doesn't look like any of his fellow Espada. He just feels like he's on his own little island of creepiness, but I think that adds so much to his character. I'm not sure exactly why he looks like this. Maybe this is what happens when a Gillian's mask is removed, because they're made up of multiple hollows, right? So maybe this is connected to that, or maybe there are still things I just haven't really learned about yet. Whatever the case, it's a gross, fun design, and I love the touch of the 9 tattoo being on both floating skulls. And there's also just something subtextually creative about an Espada that seems torn between 2 identities, with no real singular face of his own, stealing the face of another. I love that. And all of the body horror with Eren Yarrow was super effective too. It just felt really gross, as it should, and I'm honestly fascinated by his abilities. So he can absorb and harness the power of the ones he's merged with, like in a more direct way even than hollows like devouring each other. And it's not just Kaien, but apparently he has eaten like a whole lot of other hollows. So his potential is apparently like limitless, yes? Like, he's eaten thousands and thousands of hollows. Is there a point when he gets full? Like, could he hypothetically absorb an infinite amount of hollows, or maybe even absorb another Espada? If so, this guy could be insane on a power scale, but maybe there are restrictions that we just aren't made aware of. I feel like there has to be. Like, he's the number 9, but someone like this who could potentially keep growing their power, like, he could go higher, right? There has to be a reason he's only at 9. Is it just because he was a Gillian and he's looked down upon? Like, I don't know. But if the other 8 Espada are stronger than him and he absorbed tens of thousands of hollows and he's still not number 8, that's wild. But I imagine a lot of the ones he absorbed are like not super strong or anything. But his transformation was fittingly disgusting, with the lower half of his body straight up turning into a slimy, tentacled eldritch nightmare. It gave me the vibe of some of the apostles in Berserk, and I loved the touch of seeing some of the masks of the hollows he had presumably absorbed, like being part of the body. But the really disturbing part to me is that when he's this Lovecraftian centaur, he's presenting himself with Kaien's face again. It just drives home the desecration being done here, with Kaien's corpse being twisted and contorted into something monstrous. And Kubo did a great job linking all of this from a visual standpoint with the hollow that possessed Kaien and that Eren Yarrow also devoured, Metastasia. These kinds of visuals of tendrils working their way through bodies hasn't been shown much with hollows, but it's a nice visual link to show that despite Rukia's best efforts in saving Kaien from that particular hollow, Kaien's unfortunately still suffering a similar fate within the grasp of all these tendrils. And Rukia is pushed to her absolute limit. And I'm not just talking physically, I'm talking mentally and emotionally. She's just at a breaking point. And that all culminates with a particularly horrific image that stuck with me. When Rukia's sword snaps in half and she's run through by the trident that Kaien used to wield, she's on the verge of death and looks down to see the face of the man she used to know, that she loved, laughing at her, gleefully impaling her, and on the brink of murdering her. The thought of that is truly horrific and disturbed me a lot. Just imagining being in that position of staring at the face of someone I hold dear as they so joyfully take my life. Even if you know it's not them, the last thing you would see is the person you loved's face contorted with so much hatred for you and so much joy at your misery and the fact that they're about to end you. That would be a horrible final image to have. I don't know, that thought just really got me during this whole part, but thankfully it was followed by one of my favorite fight climaxes in the series so far. When Rukia's impaled by Eren Yarrow's trident, she remembers the real Kaien and what he left behind. She doesn't let this awful image of him be the last thing she thinks of or sees. No, she remembers him as he really was, and not this warped funhouse version of him. And this is the part of these chapters that really got me, because there's a whole beautiful notion about the heart and where it resides. Kaien believed that when people grow close, a heart is formed between them, and that it's left behind with the other person when you're gone. This is honestly such a touching sentiment that I love, and may adopt into my everyday thinking. It's just beautiful. The moment when she reveals that Eren Yarrow may have Kaien's body and soul, but he doesn't have his heart, that his heart is still with her, incredible, like absolutely beautiful moment when she says that, and then she puts her sword through his face. It's such a satisfying, earned ending, and I could see someone being mad that Rukia is completely at his mercy and beaten and then kills him in one little shot. But I like to think that even the most powerful enemies can be easily killed if they're caught off guard or overconfident. This was never a battle about power levels or about abilities, really. It was a battle of the mind. This fight was a mind game that Eren Yarrow was playing, and Rukia won. Because as messed up as this whole thing was, it gave Rukia an opportunity to really come to terms with what happened. She faced her guilt head on, remembered the man that used to be beside her, and managed to exorcise the ghost of her past, hopefully for good. The actual end of Eren Yarrow was disturbing in its own right, which I guess is pretty fitting for him, all things considered, but just to see how small he really is, how he's taken and taken and taken, but at his core, he's a fragile little creature desperately clinging to existence, begging Aizen for help. Like, this is probably one of the most evil characters we've met so far in Bleach. The stuff he was taking joy in, and the way he was toying with Rukia's guilt and grief, and just completely disrespecting the memory of a good man, and someone that he knows everything about. Like, he knew how much Rukia cared for Kaien, and he used that against her, and took so much joy in it. Eren Yarrow is one of the most despicable characters we've met. I don't know. I really enjoyed him as a villain in this part of the story, but he is absolutely one of the most disturbing characters we've met. And to have Rukia so seriously wounded but still crawling to try to get to Orihime, it's a wonderful moment for her character and to show her resolve. We spent a whole arc trying to rescue Rukia from captivity, and now she's on the other side of that. She's been in Orihime's position. It's powerful, and it makes me love Rukia somehow even more than I already do. This was a fight she didn't know she needed, but I'm glad she had the opportunity to get some real closure with herself about Kaien. I know this is a long video. I can see as I'm recording that this is going to be a long one, and I hope you're still here with me. I'm wrapping up, but when it comes down to it, these chapters highlighted the things I love most about Bleach, and that's the deeper introspection into human connection, what it means to have it, and what it means to lose it, and how to move forward once it's gone. I'm sure most of us have lost people, often before we thought we would, but we have the memories with them, those connections that we formed with them. They don't disappear when they're gone. No, they left parts of themselves behind with us, and we need to take care of those parts. We protect the memories and the leftover pieces of the people that we loved, and keep them safe from anyone that would try to tarnish them. And that applies to the stories that affect us and change our lives too. We all have our own experience and our own feelings with this series, and the connection the story formed with us is very personal. I know that applies to me, and I'm sure that applies to most of you watching. We've all developed strong feelings about Bleach. Even with all of the action, the twists, the horror, Bleach shines brightest between it and its readers when it manages to dive into heavy, human emotions, when it can connect with things that we've been through or we understand, and makes us really feel what these characters are going through. We carry this story with us because this tale of souls and death and life formed something powerful. If Kaien is right about hearts forming between people, a heart formed between Tite Kubo and his readers, and that heart is Bleach. It's a beautiful story that some of you finished years ago, or people like me are currently in the middle of now, still affecting us, still making a difference. Bleach's heart is with us, the readers that it changed, and that it continues to change as the years go on. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I know this was a long video, but if you're still here, thanks for sticking with me, and I'm looking forward to continuing to go through this arc that has quickly turned into something incredible and crazy, and if this is just the 9th Espada, oh my god, the rest of them should be something. I'll see you guys next time.